Hey everybody, welcome to Workforce Gaming. I'm Doug, along with Brad.
Hello.
And Brad, you've been actually very, very excited about this game,
I have.
Octopath Traveler. And now I think it's kind of funny because we always talk about like what a $60 game is to us, sort of thing. And I remember like after the demo, like I think even the first demo, you basically pre-ordered this thing like right away, or I just remember, or maybe the second demo. But I remember you were very excited to pre-order this game.
I
So
was pretty much all in after the first demo,
yeah,
when it was still Project Octopath Traveler, like whenever that was, like last November or something like that.
yeah.
And then the 3 hour prologue demo, I played that and just absolutely loved it.
So yeah, so that's where I kind of want to start with this. It's like why is this one? Why this one as opposed to like because we haven't played Persona 5, we haven't touched Ni no Kuni 2, we haven't touched these like kind of other very big JRPGs, but like what kind of drew you into this one?
I think this one in particular is a couple things. First of all, just the simplicity of it.
Hmm.
I love. This is not a Persona 5 massive scale game. This is a very simple old school style game where it's just you're going through your story, you're doing your normal RPG thing. I look at Nino no Kuni 2, I look at Persona 5, and those are games that are still like way up on my list of games to play. It is an RPG. We're not trying to sell you this big social interaction. We're not trying to sell you this kingdom builder thing. We're not trying to sell you all these add-ons.
Gotcha.
And a lot of time those add-ons just really get in the way of me really liking a game because I'm here for the RPG. I'm here for the here's the story of this character going through this adventure, and you're just going through that adventure. I don't need the extra stuff piled on top
Oh,
of
so
it.
you don't have all these additional. You knew kind of like, oh, I'm not gonna have all these additional systems. I'm gonna have like my one or two systems I need to learn instead of all the additional ones. Because like the Persona stuff to me, like the building characters and stuff is really freaky to me. But in this one, because they just
Agreed.
burned all that away, that's what you like.
Yeah, yeah, and it just goes back to those Final Fantasy VII. It goes back to the old school Super Nintendo ones where it's just this is just an RPG. This is our story. Here it is,
Hmm.
and I really like that. And the combat as well. Sitting down and playing this and doing the combat for a couple hours in those demos, the combat is such a good hook to
Hmm.
this. You're constantly thinking, and it's always this feeling of how am I going to strategically do this, which I don't feel like is done very well in a lot of RPGs, especially now because so many of them are trying to get into this. Well, how do we make this combat more active? How do we get it so you're doing more things? So you're not just clicking through menus. This went with how are you clicking through menus, but how are clicking through menus super strategically, and how are we going to make you think through these menus? And we're going to give you enough systems to play with where you do have to think through every
Hmm.
choice rather than going, oh well, this is just like the old ones, but now you can control your character's movement, and this is just like old RPGs, but now you can just keep slashing all the time and you have an auto attack. So I liked kind of that old school feel, but definitely adding layers onto it more in terms of what you're thinking about rather than what you're actively doing.
Is this one of those games? Because I feel like if you think when I think old school JRPGs, one of the things I don't like is I think you sleepwalk through like 90% of the battles in a Final Fantasy game because you're like
Yep.
attack, magic. Okay, I get it. But in this one, like even those minor battles, are you sitting there thinking like you can't sleepwalk through any battle?
The majority, yeah. I mean, once you get really late game because each area is leveled, so there's a couple of points where you'll go back to a town that you started from,
Yeah.
and the game is really clear. As soon as you enter an area, it says recommended level 20. So it'll say like Western City Gates, recommended level 25.
Hmm.
And if you are within if you're still probably 33 and you're going in there, then yeah, you still have to think about it.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's
If
nice.
you're 50 and you're going into a 25, then no you don't. But even walking through different places right around your level plus or minus 5, you always are doing some thinking just because there's vulnerabilities, there's weird things that can happen. You could probably sleepwalk through them if you wanted to, but with the vulnerability system and the way it works and how damage works in this, there's a lot of still okay, I can sleepwalk through this and it's going to take me 6 minutes, or I can just do it right and it's going to take me two.
Oh, that's cool. So you could be a if you think about it, you can like surgically just like cut right through a battle. But if you do it the
Exactly.
lazy way, you're gonna just take a long time.
Exactly. If I just sit there mashing attack, I'll still win just because at this point my characters are over leveled.
Yeah.
But it's going to take me longer than if I go, okay, you're vulnerable to thunder. Do a thunder attack on all of them. Hit each one with a sword and be done.
Oh, dang. That actually, not. Dang it.
Yeah, there's lots of thinking, and then again, using your BP, which is essentially like a charge up,
Yeah.
also really affects battle and the way that you use that in terms of because each enemy is given a number for vulnerability.
Yeah.
So maybe Doug's vulnerability is a 5, and you're vulnerable to these 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
So your BP, what you can do with it, you gain 1 point every turn.
Yeah.
What you can do with it is you can either use it to power up an attack if you're using magic, or each BP is worth 1 more attack if you're using a physical attack. So if I see that Doug's BP is 5 and Doug is vulnerable to a sword, I could use all of my BP that maybe I've stored up just to knock your vulnerability off, and then I'm doing like essentially double damage to you more or less.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Or I can save it all up, and then when I knock your vulnerability down, my attacks are like doing double damage plus double damage even more because you're invulnerable and you're stunned for that turn.
So basically, if you don't use that system and you're trying to like no through it, then you're not going to be able to. Then you're just going to chip away at them for a day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, forever. It'll take you a long time, and you could probably beat most of the stuff not using it, but it's really cool the way all these things kind of tie together to make combat something that you really do have to think through, especially when you get to boss battles and how much of this am I using, and you got to kind of count turns, and it shows you in the top, like Child of the Light is always the first one that comes to my mind, but I know it's not the first one to do it, where it shows you turn order at the top.
Oh, Grandiose, I think. Yeah.
That's the one that I can never remember. And even that, because when you're vulnerable, they'll lose their next turn. So there's sometimes where it's actually beneficial to you to just go like, okay, this is the last character this turn. I'm just going to use a healing item now, so that when the next turn round starts, I can see that I can stun them this turn, they lose this turn and the next turn.
Oh, wow, dang.
Where had I just done it before, they would have just lost 1 turn. Now they're losing 2 turns. So there's so much to think about, and the game helps kind of build you there too, where it's never like, in the beginning you don't really need to use all these systems, but by the last couple bosses, you're really kind of stuck where you're at.
And the thing I like that you're kind of saying this is that you're not mentioning stats a lot. I'm sure that does come as like basically you need to be this level, but like I think it's kind of interesting. Like you're thinking about using the mechanics, not necessarily just like I feel like with Final Fantasy games, like I'm at this stat. It's like, oh, if I just raise my strength to ungodly levels, then I'm fine.
Yeah, there is a little bit of that. I pretty much went the route of just every time I went into a town, hoping I had enough money to buy the next strongest weapon and just equip that to one of my main characters. The way I played this, and you can kind of interchange your party whenever you want, except for the character you choose to begin with. I chose Hannah to begin with, who is the correct choice because she's awesome. Highly recommend you pick her if you're going to play this game. I basically stuck with 3 mains and then interchanged out my 4th.
Gotcha, yeah.
Which, I guess I should have prefaced with this. I have completed all 8 stories.
Yes.
I did not complete the crazy last, maybe it's post-game, maybe it's part of the game dungeon thing that's out there. So I guess that's a good place to I probably should have started with that. But
I think if you put like 80 hours in the game, you can talk about it.
Yeah, I'm like 60, but I know there was some really weird like controversy with some reviewers and some people talking about this where it's like, oh, well, you didn't do the post-game or end-game depending on definitions of stuff.
Yeah. Until we get on Metacritic, I don't care.
Well, we don't do scores, so that's not going to happen. But I know that we'll get into that more when we get to the story stuff. But for combat-wise, in terms of stats, a lot of it was just, I'm going to go buy the new strongest bow, equip it to one of my main characters, and I kind of played through it that way.
Gotcha.
So it never really became it was never something I had to worry about. Like I had to go in and look at the numbers and go like, oh crap. And it does the nice thing where it's like, here's your current equipment. If you buy this, it goes up this many numbers, and you go, cool, that's more. And just buy.
I love that. When you see like, it's like all green. Done. No decision. I didn't even think about this. Green arrows.
Yes, exactly. It's all green. We're good. I hate the ones where it's like, oh crap, that's a 578. Let me close the shop menu, open my equipment menu. Oh, I'm at a 576. Okay, not worth it. Yeah. And then you scroll down and but the elemental, what was my element? I hate doing that. This is the nice one where it just puts it there. So honestly, just the combat in this game is incredible, and that was the hook for me.
I was gonna say that's kind of funny that you're talking combat first, because I think when you said the things that you're interested with traditional JRPGs, you said story and combat, and then you're like start with combat first, which is kind of this is interesting because I also know that you're a huge story guy, and Danganronpa is the best thing ever.
Not the best thing ever. It's up there.
So I guess on that case, so I mean, if this does burn everything away, and really the only things you're left with are the combat mechanics and the story, so how is the story? Because I've heard things.
Yes, things. Things is the proper way. The story is very hit or miss. So the basic idea of this, and again, this is where me having not done the post-game dungeon, I will say, essentially the way my characters were leveled and having to do some side quests and stuff is just one of those things that after about 60, 70 hours, I was like, I just don't want to get into that.
Yeah.
Because it was one of those things where it's like I glanced at like online for like some guides for like what are the level requirements, like is this a post game thing, like do I have to like hit max level, and it's like, oh, you need to be here, and it's like, okay, that's like 10 hours of grinding and I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the way the game's set up, and each character has their own individual stories. These things have no overlap until you get to that post game thing. There is no connection between them. They have very, very minimal interaction with each other.
Yeah.
And it's just going through these 8 stories. I think that's to the game's benefit and also hugely to its detriment.
Okay.
It's to its benefit because there are just some really good stories, and I think sometimes in RPGs you get that thing where you start adding in other characters, and it's like, I don't want to know the side character's take on this story. I just want this one character to be able to go through their story.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And I want to know the story of Primrose. I just want to know her story. I don't need Hannah coming in and giving her 2 cents on it, and I don't need all this other stuff. And, oh, well, my friend over in this village, and now we have to go talk to you. It's just that story, and that story connects really well. Mm-hmm. However, again, you do really get to the point, especially with some of the stories that aren't as strong, where you're just like, I don't want to keep going through this story, and you don't necessarily have to, but it's just kind of that, okay, I'm getting to Tressa's story in my mind was one of the weaker ones until the end. It actually got pretty, I really liked the conclusion to it, but Tressa's story I thought was fairly weak, and every time I get into her story, I'm just like, okay, all right, let's go through this, and you just kind of do that, like, tap, tap, tap. All right, okay, yep, you're still reading the names in this book, you're still going to try and be a great merchant, this is really exciting.
Oh, bummer. Yeah.
But then you get to, like, Primrose, whose story is super back and forth in terms of, like, who all these characters are, and there's some mystery to it. And every time you get to a Primrose story, you're like, yeah, this is great, this is great, this is great, this is great.
Yeah.
So it is hit or miss, just because had maybe you put in some of those characters into Tressa's story, which is a very basic, she finds this book, and she wants to explore what this person explored in the book. And that basically sums up her story.
Oh, okay.
So, if you had some extra characters kind of commenting, you had some extra work going on with that, maybe it's better. But I feel like something like Primrose, where it's just her very personal story, I don't want the other characters interacting in it.
So if there is some sort, so on that same point though, would you have liked like at least some sort of like, even if they had these sort of like separate individual stories, would you still like some sort of through line story that could tie them together in some way?
Yeah, and I think a through line would have been helpful for this, just because it does take some of those more boring ones and make them a little bit better.
Yeah.
The nice thing I will say is that each character has 4 chapters. Each character had at least one chapter that really stands out.
Oh, okay.
So like Tressa, like her story is, in my mind, was probably the weakest. Yeah, I think hers is probably the weakest. Mm-hmm. But like the final chapter of hers is really interesting, the way kind of all of her story threads tie together into this one big moment for her.
Okay.
And even like Primrose, who I think has one of the stronger stories, like the opening chapter of her story is just so kind of crazy and so like, what the fuck? Why are you living in this?
Yeah.
That it's amazing. And each character has that one chapter, I feel like, that just outshines the rest. And it's like, this is the kind of the climax of this character's story. And they're really well interspersed, because the way the game's progression works is that essentially you do everybody's chapter 1, then go back through to everybody's chapter 2, everybody's chapter 3, everybody's chapter 4. Yeah. And there's level requirements that essentially prevent you, unless you just want to grind for no reason, mm-hmm. from doing like Cyrus, and then going back. The way the game kind of does it is that 2 or 3 of the characters have their best chapter in chapter 1. 2 or 3 of the characters, their best chapter is chapter 2. 2 or 3 of them. So as you go through this, you would think, okay, chapter 2, like this is kind of just our setup chapter. Like we got introduced, we're just kind of building plot to get to kind of the climax and, kind of resolve their story and everything. But there's a couple characters where, like Cyrus in particular, his opening story is essentially you're a teacher, you run into some trouble with some of the students and everything, you get put on suspension, you have to leave the university you're teaching at, okay. Right? You're like, okay, whatever. But his second story, where he kind of figures out, okay, there's this book called, I think it's called Far from the Reaches of Hell, okay, that's missing. And chapter 2, you're explaining what this book is, and you realize there's a lot of cult stuff going on, and his chapter 2 is like really this strong introduction to his actual story.
Oh, interesting.
So just the pacing of the stories are all over the place. Yeah. Which is a really cool way to kind of keep you invested as you go through.
That's interesting. I wonder if that, but you're saying like that can strengthen or weaken a story, because if you had if it's taking you forever to get to the point, that makes it feel like a weak story. But or on the other hand, if you already hit the coolest stuff at the beginning, then you have nothing to keep you tagging along through it.
Exactly. Where again, like just thinking about those stories, it because there's so much weird things they're trying to do with the storytelling.
Yeah,
You kind of almost have to approach these stories as one big story, but as 8 individual stories. And I think that's kind of the approach that they took. Is they said, okay, chapter 1 we need 3 big moments. Chapter 2 we need 3 big moments. Chapter 3 we need 3 big moments. Chapter 4 we need 3 big moments.
yeah,
And how do we fit those moments into each of these 8 characters' stories? So each character has their big moment, but some of them need to be at the beginning and some of them need to be at the end. Because if you're just getting that basic introduction, that boring introduction to each character,
yeah.
that game's getting turned off quick. And you get to chapter 2 and 3, the middle of the plot, and everybody's just going like, "Oh yeah, he is in the next town over. I'll go to the next town over."
Yeah.
And like, "Oh, okay, great. Like I'm just doing fetch quests here in the middle."
No, that's interesting. Actually, I had never heard that point. That's actually really interesting because I was curious how they were doing that. So, I mean, I guess when all is said and done with like the combat and the story, like, what are your overall feelings on it? Like, do you like it? I mean, was it great? Was it meet your expectations? I guess here, did it meet your expectations or exceed them?
Yes and no.
Okay.
This is one of those games where you play it, and I'm having a great time when I'm playing it, but there's also that lingering thought of like there's just 3 or 4 things that could take this from like a really good game to an amazing game.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of games have it where those 3 or 4 things are not right in your face all the time, where it's like,
Oh, okay.
I feel like there's something this game could do to get better, but I just can't put my finger on
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
This very clearly has that, like, as you're playing, this is so good. Oh, but if they just did this, it would be amazing.
Gotcha.
So it's that weird feeling of like, I'm really, really loving this. I'm really liking this. But there's always that hanging feeling of like, oh, but it could just be so much better if you just would have tweaked it.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess on that, I just gotta end it real quick. Like, I know there's some issues you had, but is it because Octopath Traveler 1 felt so new and stuff? Do you think even if they tweak this stuff for Octopath Traveler 2, is it gonna keep you, are you gonna be like interested in it or what?
I would love to play a game that's similar to this, where it has that same feeling, the same style,
Mhm.
all of that stuff. Would love to see something similar done to this. And again, I think it's one of those things where, first game in a series is always that kind of testing the waters, especially when you're trying some new things like this.
Yeah.
Second game is really where you're going to nail it. So
Mhm.
whether this team makes an Octopath Traveler 2 or whether there's whatever their next project
Mhm.
is, if it's similar in vein to this, I am on board day one again.
Cool. All right. Sounds good. I'm actually kind of excited for this. This is definitely my wait for a sale game, but like, dude, playing that in handheld felt so good for that demo.
It's oh yeah, it's great. And again, like I think I mentioned this in Xenoblade, just being able to just go and turn on the TV and grind for a little bit,
Yeah.
it's so good. Just I need 5 more levels. All right, let's turn a movie on. Let's get those 5 levels. This is gonna be great.
That's actually a good point. All right, so we are Workforce Gaming. If you guys like what you heard, you can always follow us at Workforce Gaming on Twitter and subscribe to us whatever you're listening to us on. We'll see you guys next week.
See ya.